Welcome to episode 53 of Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro. My name's Kiara, Allessio, the technical writer for Supervisor, and today I'm joined by Oscar Rondon, who is our principal geostatistician. On this episode, we'll be having a general chat about the theory behind conditional simulation, as well as why it's so important in mineral resource estimation. So to start us off, Oscar, could you give us a brief rundown on conditional simulation and also tell us why it's so important?
Yeah, conditional simulation is a great tool, Kiara. It's completely different to what estimation is. With conditional simulation, we try to capture the variability in the data. That's as I mentioned before, is very different compared to estimation. The applications of conditional simulation are very different, and conditional simulation usually requires a lot more work and validation than the resource estimation.
To prepare for conditional simulation, after you do all of your initial data analysis, you generally have to transform your data into a Gaussian or normal scores distribution. Why is it so important to do those data transformations?
Yeah, that's an important question. It's a great question, Kiara. All the theory, all the techniques that we have to run conditional simulation are designed for Gaussian values, right? So we have another assumptions, what we call multi-Gaussian, but by doing the anamorphosis or the transformation into normal scores, we at least ensure that the data has Gaussian distribution, okay? So when you look at your histogram, you are going to have the bell shape, classical of conditional simulation. That's what we usually do, and it's a must, okay? So we take the data, gold data or iron data, you name it, and we can transform this to Gaussian space. We run the conditional simulation using the techniques designed for Gaussian values, and we back transform the results.
So is that necessary to do if, say, you happen to have data that's already in a relatively normal distribution, or would you perform the transformations regardless?
Yeah, look, it's very difficult to have a data that has exactly Gaussian distribution. I haven't seen one yet, but if that is not the case, you need to transfer the data to Gaussian distribution. If it's already Gaussian, we don't need it.
Yeah, perfect. So after the data is ready to go, variogram modeling's been done, we get to the super important part, which is the selecting the simulation and the method type. So there are a few different options here, but I think the main ones that I'm familiar with are the sequential Gaussian simulation, correct, sequential indicator simulation, and the turning band simulation. Correct. So this is kind of a bit tricky, especially when I was first learning how to do conditional simulation. This was quite confusing trying to figure out which of these methods was most appropriate. So could you give us a bit of a rundown on those different simulation types?
Sure. Look, Kiara, first we need to make a distinction between continuous and categorical variables. Let's say if you have continuous variable, I mean grades. For this, you can use techniques like you mentioned, sequential Gaussian simulation, turning bands, or you also may have indicator variables or categorical variables where you have only two values. That is one way to deal with geology in resource estimation. So you could simulate your geology using indicator variables, and that is where the sequential indicator simulation applies. So first you need to understand if you want to simulate geology or you want to simulate grades. Let's say that you want to simulate grades. There are a number of techniques that are available. The most common ones are sequential Gaussian simulation and turning bands. What the practitioners need to remember is that both are conditional simulation techniques. Mm-hmm. So if you don't care about what technique or another, you just want to run a conditional simulation, you can use sequential Gaussian simulation or you can use turning bands.
Cool. And so another thing, I suppose, while I think this is common with a lot of people learning how to do conditional simulation, there are a lot of potential options that you've got while setting them up with. There's the method that's most appropriate, but also the number of simulations that you can run, and even what to do once you've run them and got the results. So are there any general guidelines that you can give on selecting those particular things and getting started with that?
Yeah, during our training courses, I usually mention that the most important guideline is to understand what you are planning to do with conditional simulation. As I mentioned before, conditional simulation takes a lot of time, takes a lot of space in your computer. So we need to know in advance what are we planning to do with conditional simulation. The question about the number of simulations has been around for many years, and the short answer is we don't know. Some people believe that we may need 100 simulations. It has been around for a long time. I don't see any reason to run 100 simulations. It may, but we may not need that. So I usually suggest that we can run 20 simulations. We can evaluate the criteria that we get for the simulations, and we can see if we sample the space of uncertainty properly. If not, we continue running more. But in principle, 100 simulation is probably way too much.
So are conditional simulation techniques a must to use when we're assessing uncertainty in mining situations and applications?
Yeah. Look, Kiara, yes, in my opinion, they are. If we truly want to capture uncertainty, remember we are talking here about spatial uncertainty. Conditional simulations are designed to solve that problem, the spatial uncertainty. I want listeners to remember that what we are dealing is with gray uncertainty. If we are simulating, let's say, using sequential Gaussian on turning bands, we are simulating gray. If we are simulating indicators, then we are simulating geology. But the most important part here is that with conditional simulation, we can quantify or we can assess this spatial uncertainty.
So you've said that a couple of times, assessing the grade versus assessing the geology. Would you be able to go a bit more into explaining, I suppose, how those two things differ from each other?
Yeah, look, in resource estimation, the classical example is we usually have the domains defined by a geologist with wireframes or with another techniques. So we got the geologies, the domains fixed. Inside the domains, we simulate grades, right? So we simulate continuous attributes. It may happen that we have uncertainty in the geology, so we need to simulate the geology first, and then we simulate the grades on that geological domain.
Are there any common or typical issues that people run into or kind of traps they fall into when running conditional simulations, or especially if someone's first starting to learn how to use them? Are there common mistakes that you see people make?
Yeah. One of the common mistakes I usually see is people running, let's say, 100 simulations and then asking, now what? What can I do now after all that work? So that's what I mentioned before. You need to know exactly what to do with conditional simulation before running or before getting the actual results. And remember, I usually trap that I've seen during these many years is people running conditional simulations and not running any validations on that. Remember, when we do resource estimation, we validate the block models. If we run conditional simulation and we want to use the conditional simulations, we need to validate those models as well. And that's important. We need to understand exactly what is validating a conditional simulation. We need to look at the drill hole data, we need to look at the distribution, we need to look at the variability, and we need to check that the conditional simulation results that we got honors the input drill hole data.
So that draws this podcast to a close. Oscar, thank you so much for participating and joining in on this discussion about conditional simulation.
Thank you for having me, Kiara. That was good.
If you'd like to listen to more of our Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro podcasts, you'll find them for free on our website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that we can keep you up to date with further technical podcasts.